And my screen should be sharing, so you all should be able to see my screen. Good morning, everyone. We are glad to have you with us. I know that one of the things that has weighed on support coordinators' minds a lot since your initial training last year is how am I going to do my documentation? Uh, some of this is going to seem very familiar to you because we did go over this with you last year during training, but we wanted to make sure since this functionality will be going live with Rollout 2, we wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to do a refresher with you, especially for any new support coordinators who have joined us since last year. This may be brand new information for you. So let's talk a little bit about how support coordinators will do their documentation in APD iConnect. First thing that I do want to mention, I always like to talk a little bit about some of the functionalities that APD iConnect brings with it. And we were very deliberate in our development, design, and configuration with APD iConnect in terms of provider documentation. So one of the things that we have done is we wanted to make sure that we built in some of the handbook requirements and linked it to provider documentation. And then for support coordinators, the way the WSC progress note, which is your version of provider documentation, it's linked to authorizations. And actually, as a clarification, all provider documentation is linked to the authorizations. I just wanted to stress that your WSC progress note screen is also linked to your authorization. So that's some of the functionality that's been built in. And I'm going to demonstrate all of that today, so don't worry about that. And then the other part of all of this is that claims for you and all providers are linked not only to the authorizations, but also provider documentation. And again, this all ties back to the handbook requirements. It isn't anything that new, it's just how it's all tied together within our new system. Did want to stress, we heard you all loud and clear last year as you expressed concerns about sometimes as a support coordinator, you hear sensitive information that you need to include in your progress notes and your documentation. And you had consumers, you had concerns about, well, what if there's something that the providers shouldn't see? We took that to heart. The WSC progress note, where it lives in provider documentation, only you, APD staff, and Claren reviewers can see it. So the providers will not see anything on the WSC progress note. Other notes that you might create on the on the notes tab, those could potentially be seen by providers. I think you'll find for the most part, you'll be doing most of your documentation on the provider documentation tab. But let's go ahead and go through it. I just wanted to remind you that for confidentiality purposes, whatever is on the WSC progress note, that's just for you, us, and the Claren reviewers to see. So when you go into the consumer's record, let's talk a little bit about how you're going to add that provider documentation. Like everything else that we do, we're going to go into the consumer's record. So our consumer today is John Demonstration, and we're going to navigate to his provider documentation tab. And just like you hear us say all the time, file is your friend. Go to the file menu and click on add provider documentation. On the new screen that opens up the provider documentation record, you may sometimes hear people refer to that as the activity screen. Those labels are interchangeable, but on the provider documentation record, there are some fields that you will update. You will add the start date and the end date, which is the date of your contact. Because it's a monthly unit, you will not need to add the start time or end time. You can just choose the date. You will select the auth ID, which is the authorization ID from the search ellipsis, and that will automatically auto-populate the provider field. Again, this screen here is just for information. On the next slide, I'll show you a screenshot. You will, on the service field, use the search ellipsis to pull your WSC service. For our other providers, remember one of the changes with APD iConnect is that if there are multiple authorizations, services authorized for the same provider, they will all be on the same authorization. So each service will have its own service authorization number, but they'll all be tied to the same auth ID number. So for you as support coordinators, there will only be one service. But if I'm a provider that provides personal supports and LSD1, for example, to the same consumer, then both of those services will be authorized on the same authorization. For you as a support coordinator, your units will always be one. And then on your provider documentation type, you will choose either face-to-face or other billable activity. From an iConnect perspective, we're only going to speak to those two options as your documentation types. For specifics on what meets the criteria for other billable activity, those kinds of things, I have to refer you back to your handbook or to your regional or state office contacts for guidance on that. We're just going to focus on the APD iConnect functionality for today's purposes. So on this slide here, we have an example of the screen that I was just referring to. And you can see here it says activity times, which is why sometimes you might hear some folks refer to it as the activities screen. But again, we refer to it as the provider documentation record. So you're going to choose your start date and your end date. They should be the same date. This is the search ellipsis for your auth ID, and it will pull up your auth ID. It will auto-populate these activity details here. The status will automatically be pending. And what you will do when you're finished and when you get through and have added your WSC progress note before you save it, you will either leave it in pending status if you work for an agency that has a business process within that agency that the supervisor wants to review them before they're saved to complete status. That's an agency decision. But ultimately you are going to want to change the status to complete when you're finished with it, whether it's by you or by your supervisor at your agency. And then this is the search ellipsis for the service code for support coordination, and it will automatically populate these gray read-only fields, and you'll change the units from 0 to 1. Provider documentation, this dropdown has only two choices for support coordinators. It is either face-to-face or other billable activity. So you'll choose which one it is. So after you've completed this screen, you're going to go back to the File menu and you're going to do Save and Add Session Note. And what that does is that will open the new WSC Progress Note screen. There is a field at the top that is the Please Select Type. There is only one type, but you do have to go ahead and click on the drop down to get the WSC progress note, which then will open up the screen itself and all of the fields. At the top half of the WSC progress note, you're going to add in all of the information. So who was there at that contact? If it was a home visit, who was home with the individual? In my example, it was John Demonstration and his mother, Mrs. Demonstration. The type of contact is a multi-select, so you can choose all that apply on the left side and move them to the right side. And I know you've all had the opportunity to use the multi-select functionality, so we won't have to go through that specifically. And then further down on the screen is where you're actually going to type your progress note. And again, for specifics on what constitutes a good progress note or the type of information that needs to be included in a progress note, I am going to refer you back to the handbook and your region waiver liaisons for additional information on that. This is just an example of what someone might put in the progress note field. The other two fields on the screen are whether or not follow-up is needed. It is a drop-down of yes or no. If you select yes, then the new field of what the follow-up is, what the follow-up needed is, you can fill in the comments. So this gives you a way of, if you met with John, let's say at the beginning of July, and you're getting ready to go out for your next face-to-face in August, if you want to refer back, because you have big caseloads. You guys deal with a lot of people, you handle a lot of things. Maybe you don't remember everything about John when you met with him last month. You're able to open up this note and you've got this little reminder right here of, oh yeah, I need to see what the status is on the application for his PCA with Medicaid. So that's a way of helping you to keep track of things. When you're finished with the session note, then you'll go ahead, whoops, let me back up. When you're finished with the session note, you'll go ahead and you'll do the file save and close session note. Now that will also bring you back to the activities screen where you originally, or the provider documentation screen where you originally added the units and everything. So here is where you, before you do that final file save and close, which would be the save and close provider documentation, it'll be at this point that you will decide, are you going to change the status to pending, from pending to complete because you're done with it? Or within your own support coordination agency, is your supervisor going to review it and then change the status to complete? One of the things that we definitely want to stress is, as you know, everything that gets done in APD iConnect, there's history on that. So um, the support coordinator themselves should be the only people making any kind of changes to the record, because that's their documentation. So for those agencies that have a supervisory review, you guys are going to want to work out what that process will be. But again, ultimately, once it's been reviewed, it's quote unquote finalized. Someone needs to come back and change the status from pending to complete. So that's how you log the one contact that's associated with the authorization ID. But you guys have more than one contact a month. And per the handbook, depending upon the type of support coordination, level of support coordination that's authorized, determines how many contacts per month you should have. And when it comes to the authorization itself, though, because it's associated with the rate for support coordination, there can only be one provider documentation record that's associated with that authorization ID. So what we did is we built in this new service code of 0000 that you can use as often as you need throughout the course of the month without the auth ID. And so if you have full support coordination where you have to have that one face-to-face contact and another billable contact, then you're able to do those two contacts and use the 0000 code for the second one. Same as with the original contact that you've done, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to go to the individual's record, you're going to go to the provider documentation tab and select File Add Provider Documentation. There is a slight difference when adding provider documentation for the 000 code. In this instance, you will need a start time and a start and an end time. Whereas remember, when it was associated with the authorization, you just needed a start and end date. On this one, you needed a start time and an end time. So you'll enter those, and then you'll click Add, and you will leave the Auth ID field blank. And I'll show you this in a moment. Since we're not using an Auth ID field, an Auth ID for this one, then the division and provider fields will not auto-populate, so you will have to manually add those. It's very simple. Division is always APD, and that provider field is always going to be your solo or agency provider name. Automatically pops up. And then on the service search ellipsis for the service code, you'll choose that 0000 code, the non-billable progress note documentation. Same as on the other screen, our unit is going to be 1. And here again, you're going to select which provider documentation is appropriate. Is it going to be, face-to-face or another billable contact? So this is what it looks like when it is the additional contact documentation. We've got the start date and the end date. It is the same day. We added a time and an end time, and there was an add button here. So when I clicked the add, it totaled up the minutes and put a field in here. I've left the auth ID field blank. I manually added in the APD division and my provider name, and then I used the search ellipsis to choose the additional contact documentation. Added the unit as 1 and selected other billable activity. And then just like I did for the previous documentation record, I did File, Save and Add Session Note, which again opens that session note. So you guys will get very comfortable and very familiar with this pretty quickly because you do a lot of documentation. Again, on this one, you're going to do the same thing that you did. You're going to choose WSC progress note, who did you talk to, what type of contact it was, and then the information in the progress note and whether or not there's any additional follow-up that you need to do. You'll do the file save and close session note. You will then make the decision about, am I updating the status to pending, from pending to complete, or am I leaving them pending for my supervisor to see? Supervisors, you can review notes that are in complete status. They don't have to be in pending status for the supervisors to review them. As a supervisor, you have access to all of the consumers that your direct reports serve. And so even if it's in completed status, you can still take a look at that session note. Just wanted to mention that. And then once you're finished, you'll do the file save and close provider documentation. I know you're wondering, well, what am I supposed to do with all of the attachments and things that I need to add to my WSC progress note? And the thing is that within APD iConnect, that WSC progress note does not have the functionality to attach something directly to it. So when it comes to attachments, you're going to have to back out of the provider documentation tab and shift over to the notes tab. And again, I think many of you have become familiar and comfortable with that notes tab. I've checked some records. I see that you guys are adding attachments. So we won't go deep into the details of how to add the attachment. I think you've had plenty of training on that, but just wanted to stress that for those documents that you get annual signatures on. I know some of you have a packet of forms that you get signed at that initial and that annual support plan meeting. You'll be able to scan those in and attach them to a note on the Notes tab. Remember, if it's on the Notes tab, then it might be viewable by other providers. We also want to stress that you will not have to duplicate your notes. If you have got all of the details of that contact in your WSC progress note, you do not have to restate it on the Notes tab with the attachments. It's okay to simply say, please refer to the progress note dated 7/18 for the details of this visit. Signed documents are attached below. So that's what I've done here is I've gone ahead, I've created a note, and I've used the note type of support plan. In this example, pre-support planning activities as my note subtype. I had scanned in all of my documents, my signed documents from my initial meeting, and attached them to this note, and I referred back to my WSC progress note. So I don't have to retype everything that I've already put in my progress note. I've changed the status to complete, and I have done a file save and close. So it's that simple. There is no need to duplicate your notes. I know that there were some concerns about that was voiced last year. So I wanted to make sure I stress that. As support coordinators, I know you're probably also concerned about, well, what's Claren going to look at? And I did want to share with you that we have been in constant contact with Claren for probably about 10 months now, just talking about APD iConnect. I've done some demonstrations with them, and I actually did the initial training with all of the reviewers just last month. And one of the things that we went over is where will they find information in the consumer records? And for you as support coordinators, where are they going to find the specific information for the SSRR reviews? So they have had their training. They also have access to our training site and are able to just get comfortable with the layout of iConnect so that when they do start doing their reviews, they're not in the production site yet, but when they do start using the production site, they'll be comfortable with where the information is. From a support coordinator documentation perspective, they're going to look at both the WSC progress notes on the provider documentation tab and any notes that you have listed on the notes tab. So they understand that what you currently are referring to as case notes or progress notes, that information really may be in two different locations, and they're totally comfortable with that. So I just want to reassure everyone that you don't have to try to get it all in one place, that really and truly, and I believe that as Claren starts working with APD iConnect and getting more comfortable and they see all of the functionality, there are lots of places where they're going to be able to check for all of your efforts as support coordinators to coordinate the services and supports for the people you serve. They're going to be able to check and see if you've added any appointments on the appointments tab and who you've invited. That's a way of documenting, that you tried to communicate with ABC provider and the guardian and those kinds of things by documenting it in various different places. So again, this will be an evolution for all of us when we think about it in terms of what defines that global concept of coordinating services and supports as a support coordinator. That information is going to be throughout the consumer's record. But from a progress note perspective, this is where they'll be looking in those two places on the provider documentation tab and the notes tab. Again, always like to stress over and over and over that we have our resources and reference material on our iConnect page on our website. I know that last week's webinar regarding the person-centered support plan and the AIM worksheet already uploaded and there for your viewing. If you missed the webinar last week or you want to go back and take another look at it, that information is all there. We do have some new e-learning videos that will be coming very soon, actually. And today's webinar will get posted there as well. So please make sure you're checking the resources and the reference material that's available to you. A lot of folks are working very hard to make that information available. But with that, let's go ahead and jump on over into John Demonstration's record. And again, today's not going to take the full hour. We'll have plenty of time for questions, but I did want to go ahead and just walk through the process that I just described in the PowerPoint. So I'm in John Demonstration's record. I'm using the WSC CDC role, and this is critical. Some of you who are agency owners, you may also have the service provider role, or solo support coordinators, you may also have the service provider role. You can only access the WSC progress note on provider documentation with the WSC CDC role. That is intentional because if I'm an agency owner for a personal supports agency, I am also going to have that service provider role. And we wanted to make sure, again, that we had that additional security that your WSC progress notes can't be viewed by the service providers. So make sure if you have more than one role that you're switching to this WSC CDC role. Head on over to the provider documentation tab. And as you can see, those two notes that I was referencing in the PowerPoint, they're listed right here. I did have just to demonstrate for you, because again, it's all tied together. John has a plan, an APD waiver plan for the current fiscal year, July 1 to 6/30. And to see what's on that plan, I can just, without opening it, I can just push this little plus sign here and it'll show me all the services. And again, John's new to the waiver, so he just has support coordination right now. And so that's how you're able as a support coordinator to quick at a glance see what we currently refer to as the cost plan, what that looks like. And then from there, because we know that he has a cost plan in approved status or a plan in approved status, we can also then navigate to his auths tab to see all of the authorizations that he has. You as support coordinators will see every authorization for every provider. The providers will only see their authorizations. And again, if I were a provider of personal supports and life skills development 1, then when I click the plus sign beside the authorization, I would see all of the different services, auth services that would be on this one auth ID. But I'm a support coordinator. There's just the one service. I have my auth ID. I see it right there. And I also see my auth service ID. So just again, a little tip for you in terms of navigation and how to see things at a glance on a consumer's record. So we'll go to provider documentation and we'll go to file, add provider documentation. And let's say that I saw John earlier this month and I've just been out in the field and hadn't had a chance to get in and put my documentation in. So I've got my start date and end date. They're the same day. This was my first contact of the month. So I'm going to go ahead and make that one be the one that's associated with my authorization. I want to demonstrate one thing for you. This is one of those quick click tips. You can choose just the authorization, and I'll do that. And what it does is it brings over the auth ID and it populates the division and provider information, but it doesn't bring over the service. So let's go ahead and clear this. Actually, let me go ahead and start over because I do want to demonstrate both. So we'll go back and choose August 2nd. When I click on the search ellipsis, if I click on the plus sign in the auth ID that comes up, it shows the service. If I click here where it says support coordination in that row, see how it fills in this information as well. Again, I'm all about shortcuts and saving time, so I like to point that out to folks. So all I have to do here is change that 0 to 1 and then choose what type of contact it is. And again, for support coordinators, there's only two options. So we'll say this is our face-to-face. I filled in everything that I need, and I'm going to do File, Save, and Add Session Note. Remember, this option to add the session note limited only to your WSC CDC role. And I have the new window, and as I said, you only have one option, which is the WSC progress note. You choose that, and that pulls all of the information up. And so again, who did we meet with? Just John. His mom was at work. It is a face-to-face and a home visit. And we can use the control key to highlight two of them and move them over at the same time. And then here you would just add your progress note information. Last month we had follow-up about John's PCA application. We're just going to go ahead and add that again because he still doesn't have his PCA services. And when we're finished, we can do File, Save and Close Session Note. You can always do save the session note. If you have more information to add, it'll stay open, or save and close because you're finished. And again, that brings you back to the provider documentation screen. And so at this point, you can go ahead and change the status from pending to complete, and then save and close provider documentation. Once you do that, as with everything else in APD iConnect, once it's in complete status, everything is read-only and cannot be edited. You do have the ability to see notes from the caret at the end. So if you wanted to edit a note, you could, from a pending, you can actually get directly to that note from there. So this was the note from July that I had left in pending status because perhaps I needed to check on something before I finished that note. Just wanted to share that tip on navigation. So that's how you add the one that's associated with the service code and the authorization. And then again, to add the one for the other billable activity, let's say we saw John yesterday and we saw him at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We want to make sure that on this screen, we are adding the start time and end time because we are not associating it with his authorization. And then you click add, and that totaled up the minutes. I skip the authorization ID. I add in APD. I add in my provider name, and then I click on the ellipsis to search for the service code, and today it's not going to work for me. Bear with me. I apologize. That 0000 should have just popped up, not the service code. So I do apologize. And I am in the training site, so bear in mind that we are still doing some configuration. There may have been a change since earlier this week when I did the PowerPoint, but I do apologize for that. Did the ad. Well, I am stumped. My apologies, folks. I could switch to another site and demonstrate it for you, but I promise you it worked the other day for John. Let's take a look. I have it right here. I had the date, the time. Let me check my date. Nope, my date's the same. Let's see if we change the time. It is not going to work for me today. My apologies. But this is an example. This is the one that I created the other day for him for the PowerPoint. And you see that the auth ID was blank and I had the additional contact documentation. I'll have to figure out what happened. And from here, I did a file save and add session note. But here, if you wanted to see that note that was in the PowerPoint, I'm able to click on edit and that shows you the same information that was included in the screenshots on the PowerPoint. So my apologies for that little glitch today. And Elizabeth, that is actually all that I had for the demonstration today. So we do have plenty of time for any questions if you want to field any.
Yes, we've gotten some really good ones come in. I've just kind of been tracking them. So since you have your demo open, can you just kind of talk about what it would take if you had any type of spelling errors or if you needed to make changes to any of the progress notes? We had a lot of questions come in about how do you make edits, how do you update, so what can be done in that situation?
So for example, let's use this one that's in pending status, and then we'll come back and use the other example. That's a great question. So we'll open the first one from July. And let's say that my supervisor came and took a look over and she comes back and she's like, Sheila, I'm not sure that's exactly how you want to say that. Maybe you need to edit your note. So from within the provider documentation, you go to File, Edit Session Note, which is your WSC progress note. You are able to run to change anything here, but keep in mind that let's just add something. Let's just say, whoops, today I'm reviewing it and I just want to make a note. So I'm able to edit right here and I can go ahead and do first, if I wanted, I can spell check from here. So there is spell check. It will run spell check. Doesn't recognize WSC, shocker, because we all have to add it anytime we have a new system. So we're going to go ahead and add that in. Am I sure I want to add WSC to the dictionary? Absolutely. SP for support plan, I'm not going to add that one, but I'm going to go ahead and ignore all. And my spell check is complete. So I've done spell check, I've made an edit. I'm going to go ahead and save that session note. The thing to keep in mind, as I mentioned, there's always a history. So I'm able to open the history and it will show me who updated it, what day and what time. The way our history viewer works is it's essentially a snapshot of what it looked like at each point in time. So you don't necessarily know exactly what changed, but we are able to see what it looked like when it was originally created on the 12th. From a reviewer's perspective, that also shows us the date that it was originally created. So that's important to note. And I'm able to see just by glancing at it that the original note ended with a meeting and when to schedule. And today it ends with this addendum thing. So you do have that ability to keep track of who's making changes on the note and when it's happening. So that's how you would edit a note. Now for notes, let me go ahead and save and close this session note. For the notes that are in completed status, you will need to close that one. You will need to submit a help desk ticket to ask to have the status on that reversed so that you can edit it. APD is still working out in terms of permissions, who's going to have the ability to reverse the status on a note. We hope to have that finalized long before rollout 2 occurs, but as of right now, if you were to add a note, well, one, you aren't able to add a note because you don't have an authorization yet, but and that's why the WSC progress notes did not roll out last year. They are tied to the authorization. So you can't actually add provider documentation right now because you don't have authorizations. But when we get to roll out 2, if you put it in complete status and you go, oh wait, I wanted to make sure I documented something, or your supervisor reviews it in complete status and they come back and they go, you have this horrible typo in there and that's not how we do business here, then you'd have to submit a help desk ticket to get that note reversed from complete to pending status so you could go in and make the edit.
So with that, Sheila, some other questions came up about if supervisors have that ability to complete someone's note, or does the original WSC are they the only ones that can change the status?
The supervisor can choose, if that is a WSC agency's decision, it's a business decision. And so if your WSC agency decides that the way of documenting that a supervisor reviewed the note is that they're the ones that change the status from pending to complete, that's fine.
And
It
then
will record, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
the system will record who changed the status.
And then what would happen if it doesn't get changed to complete? So if the note stays in pending, how does that affect other things?
I need to double check, but I believe that the claim rule is looking for notes in or looking for records in complete status, but I need to confirm that.
Okay. So just shifting gears just slightly, we had a lot of questions come in about the ability for copy and pasting, or even doing the dictation. What are our abilities for that?
You are not able to dictate directly in iConnect itself. Now, that being said, if your computer is set up to take dictation, you've made the adjustments in the actual system settings to be able to dictate to your computer, you should be able to dictate. That's like a Windows thing. I am not an IT person, but I do believe that if you have your computer set up from an accessibility perspective, that you would be able to dictate in any field because your computer dictates. So that's one way of doing dictation. It's not iConnect specific. The other way that if you do want to do dictation, if you're using Word or something like that, you're also able to enable dictation in Word depending upon your version, and you can dictate there. Or if you use dictation software, simply what you would do then is once it's dictated, you've reviewed it, edited it, and done your spell check and all of that, you can simply copy and paste that information directly into the session note itself in the body of that progress note field. So if I had dictated all of this or typed all of this up in Word or some other note-taking area, I could copy it and paste it directly here.
Okay, that's great. I think that satisfies a lot of people's questions when it comes to the copy and pasting. In addition to that, it seems like we're getting a lot of comments and questions about having a printable output. So when someone wants to print this progress note, do we have like a print preview or something that it'll print in a nice, orderly manner?
Okay, now watch it with that nice orderly manner stuff. Every screen in APD iConnect has a file print option. There is not a customized printable output like the support plan. So what would happen if you do the file print, you are going to get a new screen that will show you what your preview looks like, and this is exactly it. And then you have the option to choose the printer that you're going to use. But this is what it would look like. My counter question to that is, why would you want to print it if this is becoming the official Consumer Central record? It may be an extra step that you don't need, is my point.
I agree. And I also want to answer a couple questions that have been coming in about the order in which you input your progress note. We've had a lot of people ask, do we do our face-to-face first and then do we do our other ones after? And I would just say that it is your own business practice. If you are someone who wants to do their notes in the order that they are rolling in, say you're scheduling things throughout the month and you do your notes immediately after, go ahead and keep your own process in place so that you stay on top of things. But if with this new system, if you find something that works better for you, you are more than welcome to change your own process. What we are looking for is just to make sure you're using the right type of note for the type of contact you're having. So that when Sheila's talking about choosing your type of contact, you just want to make sure you're selecting the right one for the right date and you're meeting all those handbook requirements. If you have questions about how to meet those requirements, you can contact the region. You can also reach out to me, and I'll be happy to help you navigate that a little bit more in detail. But for purposes of today and a lot of the questions coming in today, we're not asking you to change your process. We just want you to document it here in iConnect with the right dates and the right type of contact. So moving on just a little bit, we just have some detail type questions, such as like, how do we find the authorization number, or what's the difference between the auth ID and the PA number? So can you just clarify that a little bit, Sheila?
Absolutely. Keep in mind again that we're in the training site, so we don't have the direct link, the interface with FEMAS, so there are not PA numbers on any of the authorizations in the training site. But let me go ahead and open up, let me slow down and go back. I'm in John's record, I went to the auths tab. That's where you start to find the authorization. It will show you a grid view of all of the authorizations that the consumer has. And again, at a glance, you can hit the plus sign and see what services there are, or you can actually click on it and open it to see the authorization itself. The authorization will show you the start date and the end date of the authorization, the status of the authorization, and in the future, when we're in the production site, that'll actually be the status as well from FEMAS. Right now, the approved means that it has passed validation in APD iConnect. If you click on the subpage for auth service, it will then bring up the specific information for this particular service. And again, just like any other grid view in APD iConnect, you can click on it, you can open it to see more details. And again, that will show you at the top what your PA number is. So once this has been transmitted from APD iConnect to FEMAS and it comes back with the PA number, that field will be populated and there will be all of that information in terms of, like right now, it is showing as ready to send. That means that it has passed validation, but it has not been transmitted to FEMAS yet. When it comes back from FEMAS with the PA number, I believe the EDI status will be fully approved.
Okay, so a couple of questions came in just with that comment right there. Why would we need the PA number? And if someone loses Medicaid, does the authorization go from approved to rejected status? Can you answer those?
I'm going to give it my best shot. So one, the PA number, keep in mind that Medicaid is still the payer on these services. And so while we have passed the validation within APD iConnect, we still have to submit it to Medicaid for prior authorization, which is what that PA number is. So that's why you have to have the PA number. The approved in APD iConnect says, yes, it looks like it passes all of the rules that have been set up to enforce the handbook. And that's what our plan validation rules are. But it is ultimately up to Medicaid to say prior authorization is issued. So that's why you need the PA number. That part of the question was really easy. What was the second part of the question, Elizabeth?
The second part was if someone loses their Medicaid, um, will the authorization change from approved to rejected status?
I do not believe so, because
Okay,
we only transmit the authorization one time. It would not be transmitted through the FIMIS interface again unless we did an update on the authorization.
that's what I was thinking too, but we can also get some clarification on that as well.
Do the iBudget authorizations change if somebody loses Medicaid?
I don't
I don't think so.
I don't think so, but
I think the claims get denied if their Medicaid lapses.
I think so, but I don't think the authorizations change.
Correct. Because we're not, the service is authorized. It's whether or not Medicaid is able to pay it is the issue if they've lost their Medicaid.
Right. So I am going to move off the authorization topic and go back to the difference between the WC progress notes and the notes tab. There were definitely questions about if you needed to upload confidential documentation, how can that be done if the upload is done in the notes tab, which is available for everyone to see?
Could I have an example of what type of documentation might be confidential?
The one that came through was someone said a copy of an email that had confidential information on it that they wanted to include with their progress note.
One of the things to keep in mind is that, and this is going to sound a little bit technical, so I'll apologize in advance, but let me go ahead. I'm on the Notes tab. I'm going to do File, Add Note. Part of our security is having the note types. So we've got the various different note types and subtypes. I'm going to be honest up front that I won't remember off the top of my head. Some note types are not viewable by the service providers. APD staff can see them all, Claren can see them all. There are some note types that cannot be seen by providers. I'd have to look at our configuration to determine what those are. And if we need to take a look at an additional note that is specific for confidential information, we can take that back to the team and see if we can't work on that so that we have that added security for you all.
Okay, that's great. Sorry, a lot have come in the past couple of seconds, so I'm just taking a second to read through them.
That's fine.
So just bear with me on a moment. So, and I'm sorry I didn't catch this one earlier, but some questions did come in about if WSCs need to use their backup providers or if, or backup WSCs, or if providers also have backups, are they able to go in and leave provider documentation for that consumer, or does the primary worker have to be the one to do that?
So again, one of the things to keep in mind with specific to the WSC progress note is it's this role right here that gets you to the progress note, the WSC CDC role. Remember, as you learned in your training last year, that there are several ways that someone can have access to a consumer's record. They are either the primary worker on the APD division record, or they have an open provider selection record for their agency, or they have a valid authorization. Those are the three ways that someone has access to a consumer's record. If I'm a solo WSC and Elizabeth is my backup, then what I would have done is I would have added a provider selection for Elizabeth's agency or her solo provider. I would have added that, and with Elizabeth's WSC CDC role and that open provider selection, she is able to access John's record. And while I am vacationing in the Bahamas, if something happens and she needs to come in and adjust his plan and add units or make a change to his plan and plan services, she's able to do that. And then if she wants to document that on the provider documentation, she will be able to go and add that. Elizabeth, I think one of the things we will want to clarify, because the backup support coordinator won't have an authorization, it would most likely have to be the 000 other billable activity, but I'm going to take a note to clarify that.
Okay, and actually that leads me into a question that has come up multiple times. Is there anything that says a type of progress note should be linked to the authorization number, or can it be whatever the first note is of that month? Does that make sense, Sheila?
It does, and not being fully abreast of all the handbook requirements, there's nothing that I am aware of that's built into the claim validation rules in terms of which type of documentation, whether it needs to be the face-to-face is added to the authorization or the other billable activity. My understanding is that there is the requirement to have that one face-to-face contact and then at least one other contact for full support coordination, for example. I don't believe that there is any differentiation in APD iConnect in terms of which one is which, as long as there's one of each.
I agree, and that brings me back to what I was saying earlier about the order in which someone puts their progress notes in. I would imagine the first one you put in for the month, you should probably link to the authorization to make sure that you get that one put in, whatever that type of contact was.
I would recommend that as well, but I am also taking a note to double check that with WellSky.
Okay. I think I think that's a good idea.
Any other questions?
Yeah, sorry, hold on one second. Oh, the start and end times for types of contacts that probably just take a quick minute or so to do, like emails and phone calls. Do we have any type of minimum start and end time?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. It doesn't need to be like in increments of 15 or anything like that?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, I didn't think so either. So here's a good question. There's an agency out there that includes non-billable activities in their case notes. Is that something that should be recorded in iConnect? And if so, how does that get recorded?
And I'll be honest, Elizabeth, when it comes to non-billable activities and support coordination, I'm not sure what that means. It would make sense to me that if you're keeping a progress note record, that you're going to want to document everything. Think about it in terms of, if the handbook requirement is one billable contact and an additional contact for full support coordination every month,
Mm-hmm.
as long as you've got those two in there, there is no limit to how many of that additional documentation type that you can have. You can have, if you talk to somebody every other day, you're able to have as many of these as you need to keep a good record.
I agree. I think as long as we don't have any limitations on how many progress notes to put in, if you are in the habit of doing that already, you should continue that because it's a good practice to keep a very accurate, detailed um, listing of every time you talk to your consumers.
Right.
So I just want to acknowledge that we've had a lot of questions come in about some of our other tasks that we have demonstrated over the couple of months now. And if you all could please take a moment, go back to our e-learning library and look at those resources we have there for you. That those will answer those questions. And if you've gone through those resources and you've watched the videos and used the handouts and you are still struggling, then yes, of course, reach out to your trainer, reach out to the whole iConnect team through the iConnect email box, and that's when we can really try to figure out what's going on. If you are struggling with something and you've gone through the steps that we've already provided for you, it might mean that there's something that needs to be changed or edited within your account. And so we need you to do the trial and error and testing and then come to us and say, hey, I did this and it's still not working. So
And really and truly, some things to add to that is one, you guys still have access to the training site, so you are always able to go back into the training site and practice and test it out there. You have no worries that you might break something or put something in the wrong consumer's record because they're all fictitious anyway. So please, please, please use that training site. We've left your access open on purpose so that you have a place to go in and test things out. And the other thing is that as always, your first point of contact is your waiver liaison in the region. Yes, the trainers are there, they can answer some questions, but when it comes to business process type questions, they really need to refer you back to your waiver liaison anyway. And then, as Elizabeth was saying, that if you get stuck from those things, you've checked here, you've gone to the FAQs, you've looked at everything in the library, you can't find the answer, you've been in the training site, you're still not sure, reach out to your waiver liaison. If they can't answer, they may tag the trainer behind the scenes to see if they can get the information. But ultimately, you may also end up having to submit a help desk ticket if you're just stuck and something isn't working, and that's okay. I do want to stress, because I know this has come up this week, and it's come up before, I do want to stress that we really do want you to use as your first source of information the iConnect help desk, the call center. I know that there are some folks that feel like that isn't as helpful as dealing directly with the APD staff, but the call center is specifically logging and tracking all of the types of calls that we're getting, because if there's something that we as an agency need to do to address a bigger issue, then having all of the information in one place so that we can track that data, that's critical. So please, please, please use the iConnect support first, call that number, log that call. If it's something that needs to be routed to the APD help desk, they will get it routed to the APD help desk and someone will follow up with you right away. But please make this be your first stop.